So here's a quick lecture over the parasite host life cycle. When we talk about species, inevitably there's always parasites and hosts within any ecosystem or any community. And certain species, their ecological niche, what they do is they play the role of the parasite. Parasites are going to be organisms that gain benefit from an association with a host, often causing the host some level of harm. Now, they're not intentionally trying to kill the host. Their goal is not to kill and eat the host. That's predator prey. But with parasites, they gain nutrients. Sometimes it's a place to live. Sometimes it's reproductive opportunity. Sometimes all of the above from the host, but without intentionally killing the host. So think fleas on your dog or ticks on us or whatever parasite example we want to think of. But what I want to do is talk about the indirect life cycle of a parasite and then the direct life cycle of parasites. Now, some parasites use just one life cycle. Others have kind of a combination of both. It varies from parasite to parasite. But what's fascinating when we look across the spectrum and diversity of life, nearly every taxonomic group, if we want to talk about kingdoms or phylums or classes, they have parasites. There's animal parasites, plant parasites, there's parasites that will parasitize bacteria and fungi and so on. So very, very fascinating relationship to understand more of. And the goal with trying to help human health is understanding the parasite host life cycle and figuring out how to block it. Where do we stop that life cycle of the parasite so that it doesn't continue to harm the host? Okay, so here's the general overview. You have a host, and this could be a cat, a dog, a rabbit, a person, a oak tree, whatever the host is. And what we'll see, let me get my pen up here, is that the host has something of value to the parasite. It could be nutrients, it could be the right environment, body environment for the parasite to live in, and the parasite has this association with the host. Now, I'm going to start at the host and go around the circle clockwise. You could start wherever, but I'll start at the host to make it simple. So the parasite gets released from the host body somehow. It could be I sneezed out the parasite. It could be spitting it. It could be through the feces of the host or the blood of the host or whatever the case. But the parasite, not all of them, some of the parasites are released from the host. So maybe the eggs of the parasite are found in the feces of the host. Think about tapeworms and roundworms from your cats and dogs. The dog goes to the bathroom, the eggs are in that poop. That's why if another animal is exposed to the feces, it can pick up that parasite. So this gets released from the body of the host, and then in what's called an indirect life cycle, the parasite enters into an intermediate host, or sometimes we call these a secondary host. So some other species, different than the original host, is what the parasite will now gravitate to. And it associates with that secondary host, goes through a developmental stage, sometimes it reproduces in that intermediate host, gets to a new level of development, and then finds its way back into more members of the primary or original host population. So if you're going to consider stopping this parasite, we have lots of different areas to stop it. You could block it right here from entering into the intermediate host. What if the intermediate host population is reduced? Now there's not as much reproductive opportunity for the parasite because there's fewer of these intermediate hosts, which decreases the potential of that parasite making it back to the primary host population. So all different places we could block the parasite life cycle. Maybe we block it up here. Let's just prevent it from getting into the primary host. So it changes the dynamics of public health if we're dealing with a parasite that has an indirect life cycle versus one that has a direct life cycle. All right, so let's put this into perspective, something maybe a bunch of us can relate to. Our dogs. For those of you who are dog owners or even cat owners, think about tapeworms. Tapeworms are parasites. They live in the intestinal tract of the host and they take nutrients from the host. Now, we could start this cycle anywhere we want. I like to start at the dog and work clockwise from there, but feel free, you could start wherever you want. So here's an example, one example of how a tapeworm can have this indirect life cycle. Your poor dog is infected with tapeworms. That's what this is. And when the tapeworm reproduces in the dog, it creates these little things called proglottids. These are little segments of tapeworm. They look like little rectangles. Inside of these segments will be the eggs of the tapeworm. And tapeworms have massive reproductive potential. We're talking tens of thousands of eggs coming out with these proglottids. So those come out when a dog poops. If you think your dog has a tapeworm, the first thing the vet will often ask for is, can you bring in a stool sample? Bring in some of its poop. We'll look at the poop, see if we can find those eggs in the poop. Now the eggs are floating around in your yard. They're in the grass, they're wherever your dog is pooping. And in this scenario, fleas, the flea larva eats the tapeworm egg. So now that egg of the tapeworm goes into the larva of the flea and it's not digested, it's not destroyed by the flea. The flea then goes through its developmental process and it matures and it's got tapeworm eggs inside of it because they're not hatching out inside of the flea. Your dog then eats the flea, they're licking their fur, they got fleas on them, they lick, they swallow the flea, tapeworm eggs now go into the dog. So it could cycle back to your own dog, or if you have other dogs in the house, or you take your dog to the kennel to board them, and now this parasite gets moved from one host to the next host to the next host, and it spreads through the population. Maybe a better example when we talk about diseases like tick-borne diseases, Lyme disease, which is in Illinois here, we see how that works in this indirect life cycle as well. So again, you could start at the tick. The tick feeds on a rabbit, a squirrel, a mouse, etc. If the tick contains that parasite, it goes into the host, which could be the human. When the tick gets on us, passes it to us, potentially it just stays in the tick. Tick could also feed on deer, and it just circles back around. So again, the idea with the indirect life cycle, there are more than one host species involved in this. So when we're trying to break it, we have different possible locations and options for breaking that life cycle. Now, on a direct life cycle, this is where you have one primary host species that is parasitized again and again and again and again. So we start with the host, parasite gets released, sneezed out, it's in the spit, the feces, the blood, whatever. The parasite leaves the host. Often it leaves in an underdeveloped stage. It goes into the environment, it develops and matures a little bit more into what we call the free living stage of the parasite, and then it comes back to infect another host of that same species. And then it gets into the host. Reproduction is often happening inside the host, and there's a reproduction, and then it gets released and it circles back. So you have fewer places to block parasites that have direct life cycles, fewer ways to break it, which might be good, might be bad. I mean, if you block the ability of the parasite to infect the host, hopefully the parasite population dies off. But if we can't block or minimally block the exposure to the hosts, then that parasite just continues its life cycle. So something relevant. COVID, SARS-CoV, coronavirus, whatever we want to call it, whatever term, think about the flu. The flu virus is a parasite. It works with a direct life cycle. That flu viral structure infects a host. It uses the host body for reproduction, builds up new viruses. That's what we're doing here, building up new viruses. Some of those viruses are released. You sneezed, you coughed, you spit, etc. It gets released from the body and goes to new hosts. You infected your family when you had COVID and you spread the flu throughout the house, etc. Some of those viral particles will stay within the same host, the same individual, and just continue to use the host for reproduction to make more viruses to then release and spread to more individuals in the population. So anytime you have a parasite that works from direct life cycle, it often is associated with just a single species or population, and it can run rampant through that population if it's allowed to get from one member to the next, to the next, to the next. So think about something simple with chickens. Chickens can get all sorts of different health issues. Roundworms. So the roundworms are living inside the adult chicken. As the chicken poops, which they poop a lot, they're releasing the eggs. There's a bunch of chickens running around in the chicken coop, and they're pecking and eating everything. And now all of a sudden that chicken picks up eggs of the roundworm from the infected bird, and that parasite just jumps into the new bird, and now you have another infected bird. So what I want you to think about, if you were a chicken farmer, or you raise cattle or pigs or sheep or breed dogs, if you had an infected member in your chicken coop, what is the best strategy? You identify this bird is sick, this cow is sick, it has this infection. Think about the preventative measures we take to remove those animals to prevent further infection of the population. So breaking the life cycle, again, is the key here. Often isolating or quarantining the host is a simple starting point. Keep that pathogen, that parasite, from moving to new hosts. Let the immune system of the host break it and destroy it, and you hopefully stop the spread. So if you minimize the potential for transmission to your intermediate or your new host, you reduce the parasite's ability to continue their life cycle, to continue the reproduction. Or do you just go and try to kill the parasite? Go to the doctor. This is why I'm getting antibiotics or antifungal or antiviral meds or things of that nature to try to kill the parasite outright. Other times, we don't focus on trying to kill the parasite, but can we just stop the continued development of the parasite's offspring? So can we use something to block the larva developing into the pupa? As these adults die off, your population will start to dwindle and decrease. So all different strategies. There is no one silver bullet for breaking the life cycle of parasite host. You have to understand how the parasite works and the interactions with the host. So keep this perspective in mind as we look at all sorts of different groups of organisms. There's always going to be parasites in those relationships or those communities as we explore ecology. And we want to think about, how do we break these life cycles? And can we make it a permanent break so the parasite doesn't evolve and come back worse than it was before?